But I'm going to have Anne introduce herself because she and I met last year at the screening of the movie, The Truth About Reading. And the whole movie, if you haven't seen it, you need to see the movie when it comes out in your area. And it's just an amazing story of the lives of adults that have gone through illiteracy or low literacy skills. And Anne is here tonight to tell her story about that. And so there is no PowerPoint. What a relief. This is just going to be a conversation. So we're going to talk to Anne about her story. And right, I'd like to start with tell us a little bit about your, growing up, your history, what it was like, what you experienced, and we'll start and we'll go from there. How's that sound?
Yeah, that sounds great. And before I jump to childhood, just with my own self shame and feeling to kind of need to build myself up, I'm going to start with where I'm at today. So I am a very established marketing professional today. So companies entrust me with millions of dollars. I've grown hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue for organizations. I've led teams in the past, and I really have been able to be successful in my career. In addition to that, I would say, kind of, Donna, to answer your question, to go back to childhood, I grew up in a pretty small town. I was born and raised in the same house my entire life, so I never really changed school districts. So a lot of questions that people get, well, did you move a lot of school districts? I was in the same school district my entire life. And I if you look at the school district that I grew up in, it was a good school district. It still is a good school district. It has, a small town rural feel, but, good teachers, good people that are really just trying, I think, to do their best every day. As a kindergarten coming in, statistically, I would probably meet some of those benchmarks that you may expect from someone who would struggle with literacy. My family struggled a lot financially when I was really young. And so we had, I think I was wearing hand-me-downs probably the first, all the way through, fifth to sixth grade. And they were hand-me-downs that probably made their debut as hand-me-downs when my oldest sister wore them. And then they were worn again by my next sister and then worn by me. So you can imagine when I was coming into school, I was always clean and very well kept, but my clothes were stained. And there was definitely some financial burden that was placed on my family. And you would get, both parents working really hard. So just kind of those things that you would expect. As far as going into kindergarten, I was really excited. When we were getting ready to start school, I'm the youngest of four. So I was really, really looking forward to, going to school like my siblings had. Being the youngest of four in a small town, all of my siblings had done really well in school. So I had like a reputation to kind of live up to. I was a kid that if the teachers got to weigh in kindergarten of whose class I would go into, I was definitely someone that they would want to have in their classroom. So coming in, I think the expectations were there that I was going to do well. And they were excited to have me in the class in general, right out of the gates. So that was kind of going into school. I think one of the first times when I guess something to note before we go into my story around reading is that this is something that I kept a secret for a very, very long time. So when I filmed for The Truth About Reading, it was something that I had told only a handful of people before I filmed. And so when I sat in front of those cameras and told my story, it was something that I had kept really, really protected and had a lot of shame around this secret and around the fact that I struggled with literacy. And so I think I've kind of reflected and tried to say, like, where did that shame spiral from and where did that come from? And, one of those first seeds that was planted around my learning and my development actually goes back to kindergarten. So before second grade, which second grade was the year that was identified that I had a struggle with reading. But in my kindergarten year, our teacher had organized the class about halfway through the year, if I'm guessing, some point during the year, she had organized the class with based on our levels of how we were doing academically. So there was a table that had all of the best, brightest students at that table. And then we were just put at tables all the way. And the tables were signified with a color. But it was really, really quick that all of the kids figured out who were the smart kids, who were the dumb kids. Right. And I say dumb in quotes because I don't think they were dumb, but as children, that was kind of the first moment. And I wasn't, I was at the second to last table is kind of where I was put at kindergarten. And what that did was the kids that were at the table that had the most severe need for help got the extra resources and the extra needs and the aids that came in to assist. And the table that I was at, we didn't get that extra assistance. And on top of that, by separating me from my peers that had more abilities than I had or had been taught more than I had, they were all now at separate tables from me. So now I'm sitting at a table surrounded by other children who are just as lost as I am with every assignment that's being given to us and handed our way. And so that was really the first seed that got planted for me around the shame of where I was at from a learning perspective. And it also got planted with my peers. So that one act not only opened up the door to me feeling bad about myself and where I was, but also opened up the door for kids to start teasing me. And teasing me about my abilities and where I was at, right? And so that it kind of just creates a snowball.
Well, we talk about that in school when we're placing kids. That's a big discussion about heterogeneous and homogeneous groupings, and that's where inclusion came from. I mean, it's all about putting kids together so they can learn from one another. I mean, that's a big thing right now. I mean, it always has, but and what I find so amazing is how you still remember that.
Oh, it's a very core memory in my life. I can absolutely even tell you the color of the table that I sat at.
That's interesting.
That's how core it is for me.
That's
and the
how traumatic it was, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how with the color of the table where the smart kids were too. I can very much tell you those details. Yeah. So I think teachers, when they're making those decisions, I don't think it was my teacher's intention to do that. But yeah, that is the aftermath that came out of that decision.
So so that was your primary grades. You said in second grade you were flagged for having a disability. What happened after that?
Yeah, and so in second grade, I think one thing that's important is I actually wasn't ever flagged for having a disability, and I've never been diagnosed with dyslexia. And all of the tutors that I work with have said that I'm not dyslexic. So what I was flagged for in second grade was that I was behind in reading. And when it was brought to the attention of my attention, it was a continual cycle. So it was brought to the attention that I was behind in school. And then I was sent home more homework and reading assignments to do at home. And then just due to some unfortunate circumstances at home, I wasn't able to complete the assignments by myself because I didn't have the skill sets to do them alone. And I didn't have that extra support for anyone to help me do the assignments. So I would come back to school the next day, get in trouble for not having completed the homework that was sent home for me. And then I would get more homework assigned to me, or I would be asked to stay in at recess or lunch and do the homework. Yet again, not ever having someone sit down and help me do the assignments. So it's kind of like the best way I could describe it is if I were to give you something, my sister's in Italy right now, and she's having a wonderful time. The part of Italy that she's in, they're actually speaking a lot of German because she's on the border and she doesn't speak any German, right? But all the signs, everything's in a foreign language. And, she's struggling to read that. read. And, she's got all of her Google Translate and she's taking pictures, and, she was talking about ordering at a restaurant and she thought she knew what she was getting. And then she ordered, and then what she actually got was something completely different. And when I look back at my very young second grade self, and I didn't have access to the technology that I have access to right now. I didn't have a phone. I couldn't take a picture. I couldn't have something dictated to me. I'm staring at a page filled with words that I know a handful of what these words are. And the labels that I was given by my teacher at this point and the adults around me was that I was stubborn, I was disruptive, that I wouldn't take the extra effort to do these things, that I was an unruly child. And something that's really core in my memory, and it's very young and it's very innocent, and you can put a 7-year-old in this thought process, because I was 7 at the time, was my thought was, if all of these adults would just take the time that they're spending talking about me and helping me, I wouldn't have a problem. But they had so many conversations about me, while none of them actually had the conversations directly with me or directly helping me with the problem that I was facing, because I didn't have the ability to do what they were asking me to do. So I could sit in at lunch all day and stare at that paper. And I'm not trying to be defiant. I just literally can't do what you're asking.
What to do.
What to do. I couldn't read the words to then write the answers down. Right. So it's like if you were to ask my sister, who's on vacation right now, okay, you want to eat, great, why don't you go ahead and just write down what you want in a foreign language and we'll bring it to you. And then take away your phone, take away every tool that you would have to help you do that, and then just figure it out. Right. That was very similar to how I felt at a young age. And so what I did, and I own this decision very much. At 7 years old, I decided in second grade, after getting in so much trouble, that no one was going to help me. So no one wanted to help me. One of the things that I did to self-protect was I assumed there was something wrong with me, that if everyone else could read these words and I couldn't, there must be something wrong with me, and there must be something inherently wrong with me, or else people would be showing me how to read these words, right, and how to write. And so after just getting in a lot of trouble and, the stakes getting immensely high for me at that point, I made some really big decisions at 7 years old. One of the things that I decided was that this was such a bad thing about me that no one could know. Because whenever I did know, whether it was other children teasing me or adults getting mad at me, it was inherently bad. That was my belief at 7. So I decided to keep it a secret. And that's when I just used resources that are not ideal, which then also leads to more and more shame. Mm-hmm. So one of those being, for me, was cheating, right? So the first time I ever cheated, I was 7 years old. And at the time, it served me very well. I was able to go to recess. I was able to go eat lunch. No one yelled at me anymore. No one got me in trouble. I didn't have to go to the principal's office. I didn't have to stay after school. No more parent-teacher conferences. No one else was talking about me anymore. And the only thing that it really did was it just built this internal thing of shame, that I knew what I was doing was wrong. I knew at 7 years old it was wrong. And I grew up in a very Orthodox family. So I had this also internal guilt around lying. Sure. And that layered on top of it at a very, very young age. And so for me, from really second grade, that was the last time any discussion was had around reading. That was the end that I ever received any outside assistance or attention around my literacy journey.
So tell us how you managed to survive and put this front on that you could read, besides the cheating. What were some of the things that you were doing?
Oh, wow. Coping mechanisms. I think one of the things I did, I became very outgoing. I became very likable. I played on my strengths very well. So I learned how to be very social. I also had the benefit of the age that I am. Technology was newly introduced. It was somewhat new when I was a child. So I'm the generation where I was setting up the internet for my parents, for example. They had gotten like the computer in our house, and I was the one that was setting up things. And so with that being said, I don't think our teachers were as well versed with like some of the resources that were online, or if they were online, like how would you what would you do with them? I was still always labeled as very disruptive in class. So like if you had called on me to read, I would have most likely just walked out. Like if I knew it was going in an order and I thought I could figure it out, I would look at it over and over again, and then I would think I had it right, and I would try to read the passage that I could if I thought I could read the words that were there. If I didn't have the ability to read them, I would have just went to the bathroom. I would have cut class. I would have skipped school. Like there would be days that I knew, something may have been like I would be required to read out loud, and I would just leave. Like the main area for me, and it's probably not what everyone wants to hear, but where literacy became the bigger struggle, because in school, academically, I could cheat and I became very proficient at it. So I got really good grades. I didn't ever want to get the best in the class because I didn't want the attention. So I'd fly right under the radar, but I was in honors classes in high school, for example. I wasn't someone who was standing out. Where it became much more problematic for me was in my day-to-day life outside of school. So like if I went to a restaurant, for example, with my friends, and I wanted to get something to eat and I couldn't read what was on the menu, obviously. So then I would have to start asking my friends like, oh, well, what are you going to get? Tell me a little bit more, what sounds good to you? Is there anything else that sounds good on the menu? If it was a restaurant I had never been to. And so I couldn't just do something as free as walk into a restaurant and order what I want. I was left out socially of things like passing notes with my friends, or when text messaging came into play. In the beginning, they didn't have the dictation features that they have now. So it was, things like that. When I'd go to a doctor or a dentist and I needed to fill out forms, that kind of stuff is where it became really, really challenging for me. And the amount of anxiety that I would face doing those tasks would become immensely high. And basic things like that, like even when I was learning how to drive, the signs that are on the road, or the street signs, or the street names, or things like that you just use in everyday life. Street names were extremely challenging for me.
Sure.
Because they're all names. So
exactly.
And
you've got to read them fast because you'll miss
you're driving.
You'll miss your exit.
Yeah.
I know a kid that's he's a truck driver with dyslexia, and it's very challenging for him.
Yeah. So
like read the streets fast enough.
Stuff like that, and like the amount of people. I think when I look back, like just the memories that I have of like when I would try to read in class, and there was this example in 8th grade where I thought I could read the passage, and the word was pituitary, and I read it as puberty, and the whole class just started laughing hysterically. And moments like that, I think from socially, we just don't understand the damage that does. Like if we were to log into Facebook today and someone has a word misspelled, and you look at the comments, and there'll be someone that'll make a note that like the person spelled it incorrectly, and then everyone's kind of like laughing or haha. And like those things are extremely mortifying for me. Like those, I would just cringe over and over again on things like that.
So in the movie, you tell during your interview with Nick, the director,
yes,
story about manager and manger. And it is done so powerfully in the movie that in the way you tell the story. So if you want to
Yeah,
share that.
I can do my best. So I will tell you, there's one bit of literacy that comes before then. So when I graduated high school, I personally decided that I didn't want to cheat and lie anymore, and that I was going to teach myself or get help with reading. So when I was enrolled in university, I had already gotten in based off of work that wasn't done off of my own merit. And I went into the administrative office and I asked, where are your help with, where's the programs around reading? I would like to sign up, right? I would like to get help. And I was informed, very kindly, but informed that everyone registered in college already knows how to read. So they don't have programs like that at a university level. And so at this point, I didn't really have the resources at that time to hire a tutor. I thought back to, where do you actually get help with reading? Obviously, elementary school was what my default was, but they didn't really help me very much the first time. So I didn't expect that behavior to change now that I'm not in elementary school. And so then I decided to teach myself to read. And the way that I did that was I opened up my textbook, and it was important to me, and it's important to me now that everyone knows I did earn my college degree from my first class all the way through the 4 years that I was there. I graduated and I read for the first time and wrote papers for the first time at a college level, and academically went from having done nothing to taking a full freshman class load at a university and passing classes. I only retook one class once, and that was statistics. And the reason was because of my reading ability was not as high as I needed it to be. But basically what I did was I opened up my textbook, I would read along, and then when I got to a word I didn't know, I would type the word in Google, press the sound icon next to it, look at the word, and then I would memorize that word. So I didn't know that you read every word from left to right. I looked at the words holistically, and my memory could hold anywhere between 6 to 8 letters. And I was memorizing them in like order, not reading them by sound. I don't know if there's any way to explain that, but so
complete memory.
Yeah,
Trying to do the orthographic
memory. Just solely from memory. And by the time I graduated college, I could read fluently at an 8th grade level by basically sight reading. So from memory, I could read, and writing is where I really, really struggled. So because when I was reading, the context was always in context. And in the documentary, the part that you're talking about was, I shared one of the things that Nick had asked me. I interviewed actually twice for the documentary. And the first time he asked me, well, how does this impact your day-to-day life, before you got the instruction? And for me, spelling was the biggest impact. And so I walked them through what it would take for me to send an email, just a simple email.
Right.
And the example that I walked through that is not edited took me 25 minutes to explain. And it took me about 25 to 26 minutes to send an email on average. That's where my writing ability was. And in the documentary, the example that I gave is the word manager versus manger. So I would basically be typing. I would get to a word like, hi, I'm your manager, because I was looking to use the word manager. That's what I was trying to spell. I would misspell manager, most likely. I'd look at a drop down, and now they have predictive text, which would have saved me an immense amount of time. Which also goes to show me I'm not alone, because they're doing this for everyone, right? So, but at the time before this, they didn't have predictive text. So I will look at a drop down of words, and then the example I gave in the documentary is, say I chose the wrong word. So say I was trying to write manager, but I selected manger. instead. I wouldn't then trust myself that I had selected the right word because they looked so similar, right? If you're not reading phonetically and you're just reading from sight, there's one letter difference,
Right.
literally, you know? And so I would Google the word, and then from what I could Google, I would get that I picked the wrong word, but I still don't know how to spell manager, right? So then I'm having to go through Google, this whole search to figure out how Google can show me the word manager so that I can copy and paste that and put it back in my email and then continue typing. And that was my coping mechanism that I was doing as someone who is being entrusted to do these really big jobs behind the scenes, and trying to not let anyone around me know that I was doing that. Because I felt like if people had an idea that I was struggling with something so foundational, that I wouldn't be entrusted to do the jobs that I was being,
Sure.
even though I had been successful. That's still an honest fear that I have today.
Sure.
Is that when the documentary goes live and my employers find out
Sure.
this about me, will I still be employable
Sure.
at the level I am today? And I'm not certain that answer is a yes.
Oh, wow.
But that's me.
Yeah.
So,
How much time do you think, extra time in
Um,
your workday, do you think it takes for you to get through what an average workday would be? Let's say 8 hours for an average worker. How much more time does it take for you to get through your day?
oh, now, well, so now that I have the ability to, so now that I've had remediation and I'm, oh my gosh, it's not, I can't even quantify it. It's so, I mean, I had the reputation for never responding to emails because I would go through my emails because I could read them just fine, right? So I was reading by sight, so I could read the information. I would either call you back, or if I deemed it wasn't important enough to reply, I would do whatever you asked me to do. I just wouldn't close the loop until I talked to you next. Or if I did need to reply because I was the manager, it needed to be in writing, whatever. I'd already deemed this was a very important email. If I'm replying back to you, it's a very important email.
Wow.
And so, and then I would reply, something that took me, I mean, it was probably 25 minutes to send a single email, and now it takes me maybe 2 minutes, maybe at that. I mean,
it takes me longer, I'll just tell you.
It's just like and I'm not very good. So my one struggle is I have a bad habit of not responding to emails. So email's not something that's super important to me because I've gotten by without doing it very often, or not as much as I should have, I guess, or is what expectations are. But now the actual skill of writing an email, no, it's like a 2. And I mean, a lot of people I think struggle with, well, what should I say? And those have never been struggles for me. It was more like, how do I spell the words that I want to use? Like, I know very much what I want to say. I just don't know how to, I didn't know how to spell the words. And so that was my coping mechanism. And I knew I was doing something wrong or something different than how everyone else was doing things, because it was taking me so long. So like, for example, email would take me a really long time. So I would take all these courses on email and how to get better at emails. And it was all how to organize them, how to this, and I needed help with the writing. And and from the time I graduated college, probably at about age 24, which was the first 24, 25 was the first time I ever talked to a therapist about my struggle with reading. And from that age on, I reached out to reading tutors about twice a year. So from 25 to 37, I was working with reading tutors, or not working with, I would reach out to them, most of them by email, ironically. And I would send them an email and they would reply back and say, you know, who are you looking to get help for? I would say me. And then they would say, well, if you wrote this email, you don't need help. And I would be like, well, if you knew what it took. Or they would get on, they would have a session with me. They would pull up a book, open the book. I would read the passage completely fluently. I wouldn't miss anything. And they would say, you don't have a struggle with reading.
And I think that's probably why people said that you're not dyslexic.
Yes. Probably.
Because you were so good at
Yes.
strategizing and compensating that,
Yeah.
and the root of the problem wasn't being, you know,
Well, and I don't have a lot of the things that like I think on a dyslexic where you like flip letters or like none
right,
of that is
right.
applicable to me. I don't know the actual test for dyslexia, so I'm not going to pretend that I do.
I
But
don't know. We could get
yeah,
into a long discussion about dyslexia, you know, what it
okay.
is.
Yeah, I'm not an
And,
expert.
you know,
Um,
I look at it as difficulty with reading if you translate it. And to me,
okay.
there's a continuum of severity, you know. So when do you actually get that label dyslexia? Well, I guess it's when you're having such a hard time coping. I don't know, that's just me, but so let's
I
talk about,
yeah, I don't
tell
know.
me about when things started turning around for you. You know, you said that you started getting a tutor and then in your adult world, in your adult life. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so from the time of being, and I think that one of the reasons why I speak about this so openly is because I did interact with so many tutors who told me that I was fine. And so these are people who are specialists in reading. And so I definitely know that your audience is very much in that side, that space. So looking for someone like me, I may show up a little bit differently. But by the time I had actually a friend who her children were struggling with reading, and she was telling me about a reading program that they were in. And of course, she didn't know I struggled with reading because I had kept this a secret. So I was asking really good probing questions about the program, and it was unlike anything I had seen before. And so I did what I always did. I went on the website, filled out a form, submitted help for reading tutoring. The tutor immediately called me, assumed I was looking for help with one of my child,
Yeah.
and it was for myself, right? And we kind of went through the process, and she was like, well, I guess, if you think you've got a challenge, like, let's have you do the assessment. Let's have you, and her assessment was a little bit different. So then it wasn't reading from a paragraph, right? All of the words were in lists. She had different, all of the letters of the alphabet that you took individual sounds, groupings of different letters. And then I basically worked with her on the print to speech methodology for about a year. We met once a week. I had to take a couple of breaks. It was very, very emotionally intense for me. I can remember very, very vividly the day that I saw a word phonetically for the first time. So I was out on a morning walk, and I was just looking at all of the words everywhere. And there was a license plate that said Florida. And I looked at the word, and for the first time, I saw the word sounded out. Like I read the word phonetically, not from memory, but by sound. And my body went from like an anxiety level, probably on a scale of 1 to 10, I would say probably like a 15. It was extremely high, down to like a 2. And I have never had my anxiety go back. I literally spent 2 weeks in my own body, not even comprehending that it was like, it felt so weird to be in my own body without anxiety at a constant level. Even now, a couple of years later, like, I'm still getting used to going from not having anxiety every single day to having like an increase of anxiety when it's normal to have anxiety. Like,
Right.
it's not a norm for me, for my body to go and fluctuate back and forth, which then again, you talk about like making decisions when you're having such a high level of anxiety all the time. Before I learned how to read, I would make and do things that other people would consider so risky, and they wouldn't understand why. And now I fully understand, because I was living at such a heightened state of anxiety all the time. My body didn't regulate when something was as high of a risk. So it would impact things that had nothing to do with literacy as well. But I worked with her, and that's when, emotionally, I don't know. I don't even know how to describe how life changing it was, to be able to like take notes during a meeting at work. I know that sounds so simple, but when you can't take notes during a meeting, you don't trust yourself, right? So you're trying to memorize everything that's everyone's saying. And, if I had taken notes in the past, which I would try 9 times out of 10, I didn't know what I had even written down. I was like, what word was I trying to put here?
Sure.
And so my life, things like writing an email, everything just got so much easier. And I realized how excessively hard I had been working for so many years, how much extra work I was having to do something that can literally take minutes, right? How much, I don't even know a better way to say it, but how much space was taken up in my mind by memorizing words, how many things I had to constantly keep reading. Like I read books all the time, because if I stopped reading, my memory bank would go down, and then I couldn't read fluently. So I was reading I was always reading books, always to keep my memory bank high. And so when that changed, I just felt so alone. And that is when I came across David Chalk's story and the work he had done for the documentary. And we actually both learned to read during 2020. And I had sent him an email, and I never expected him to reply. And that's where our friendship kind of just connected. And it was the most therapeutic thing I think one of the most I've ever experienced, to have someone else that was like, hey, me too. And we would talk about random things. Like he'd be like, oh yeah, I went to a meeting. I'm like, oh, I hate PowerPoint because you always have words. And then when I misspell a word, and like the whole room's laughing at you. And like how we would go around coping skills with that, and even some of that sits today. Like I don't have a PowerPoint for this presentation. I could probably put one, I can definitely put one together, but some of it is like, there's still some things that I cope around. And, so that was really healing. And that's how, so he was going to be in New Orleans for the Plain Talk conference, I believe. And they were filming, he was doing some filming for the documentary, and I live super close in Florida. So I just flew over to meet him. That's how life-changing it was to connect with him. And I had no intention of filming. I didn't want to film. When I filmed, I told Nick he could not use the footage of me in the documentary. He did not have my permission. And then I went home, and I was considering it. I grew up in Utah, so I flew home, and I was at a family friend's barbecue, and it's a big, big family, lots of kids. And I was kind of talking about my experience with literacy, and all of a sudden there was all of these children around me who were struggling with reading, and they were saying so it's a family friend. So it's my dad's best friend. So I'm not biologically related to any of them.
Okay.
But there was a lot of kids there, and I was talking about my experience, and they were struggling. And so I was getting ready to go out and connect with Nora and work with her. And so I told them, okay, I'll figure out. And I went out with Nora with Ebly, and I helped her with, her website and some marketing things. And she worked with me for about 4 hours. And what she did with me in 4 hours was, if I didn't experience myself, I wouldn't even believe it. I went from the print-to-speech methodology of trying to memorize all of these different spellings of all these different sounds, and like pull them in like a millisecond of my mind on every single word, which is, it is just so hard to do.
Very taxing.
It's so taxing, and it's so challenging. And then to sit down with Nora, and Nora's like, you can just, all of the stuff you've memorized, just let it go, which for me was probably the hardest part of working with her, because memorization has been my biggest coping mechanism, right? I memorize words, and then I memorize sounds of 4 words, and then you want me to just kind of let it all go. And
it's all I got. Don't take it away from
me. I know. I'm like, don't take my memory. Like, that's all I just need.
All I got.
To memorize something. And so when I let that all go, I went, when I did the print to speech program. I went in reading fluently at an 8th grade level for memorization. I left reading phonetically at an 8th grade level and spelling phonetically at an 8th grade level, which is what was life-changing for me. And I'm so immensely grateful for that program, because I would have never found Nora, and I would have never found I would have never had anything if I didn't have that. But when I sat down with Nora, and I, in 4 hours, was reading and writing from a spelling perspective at a college level, and it was so fast and it worked. I went back to my family, my family friends and all of the kids, and said, you guys got it. You need to try this. And there was literally children in that group, like, that had dropped out of school, that were struggling immensely. And after working with folks like Svetlana, who's on this call, and Nora, they're doing immensely well. They're getting accolades from their teachers. And that's when I went back to Nick and I said, I'd like to refilm, because I cried the entire first interview. There was not a second I wasn't crying. And I said, I'd like to refilm, and be part of the documentary.
How brave of
But
you to do that. That's really
yeah, but it was just because of the kids, how I can't even explain how drastic their transformation was.
sure.
I mean, you saw them, and this one little girl in particular, she was just having such a hard time, and now she's excelling, and she is doing so well. And so, there is, even though I think all of my teachers did the best that they could with the tools that they had, there is a much, much better way. And we really need to all, as educators, I'm not an educator, but all of our educators and all of our parents, we need to start looking at the educational programs we're putting in front of kids around literacy instruction, using the best program that's available. And for all of those little kids who don't have a voice, or who haven't gone through 3 different types of reading methodologies like I have, listen to my story so they don't have to. They shouldn't have to be struggling. They shouldn't be in year-long programs memorizing all the different phonetic sounds. It's completely unnecessary for them to do. And it is really, really hard to read that way as well, coming from someone who did it as an adult. So,
I'm with you on that. As an educator, I did the same thing, for 40 years. I taught, 30 years until I figured it out. It took me, I was 10 years into my career till I knew what I was doing.
Yeah.
or till I was given training in Orton Gillingham type of programming. And I hung my hat on that one for 30 years. And then I'm like, is there another way? Is there another way? And because of when you're doing, Orton Gillingham based program, it takes years to get kids through that. It just doesn't happen overnight. And I, as a professional, would be remiss if I said, nope, I'm just sticking to this because it's always worked for me. I mean, that's like saying, you're not going to go to a doctor that has advanced training in XYZ because, nope, I'm going to stick with my guy because he's the one that I really like, even though the other guy may know more or know a better way. And you have to embrace the science, and you have to embrace new methodology. And if we're not curious, we're really holding not only ourselves back as professionals, but the students we serve. And so, that's why this is so important for me to get this message out to, the people that are on our site. It's like, it's really important for people to understand.
Yeah, well, and it's really, like, I mean, like it is the amount of trauma and hardship that this is putting on people's lives that start out as children and then become adults, that's completely unnecessary, is I can't even quantify it. I can't, like when you say, how many hours do you save a day in your workday? How, I don't know, how much is it worth to you to be able to walk into a doctor's office and fill out a form correctly,
Right.
or go into a restaurant and order whatever you want off of the menu because you can make the choices of what there is to eat, or send a text to your friend, or read. I mean, we live in a literate world.
It's so true. And I think as
Not,
teachers,
yeah.
I work pretty much primarily with kids, first, second,
Yeah.
third, fifth graders. I had the honor of tutoring a gentleman 2 years ago who was completely, I mean, he too, he was a word memorizer. He got through life doing that. But he had all the excuses, all the shame, all the embarrassment, that, and the trauma, like you had explained. And after working with him, I really learned more from him than he did of me, for sure. But for him to give him that gift to be able to read and figure out a word instead of just guessing at it, it was,
Yeah,
real.
it's unreal. And I don't even, it's just, so I think, we have to look at this bigger than just, I prefer this methodology or this methodology. It is much, much bigger than that. And it is causing a lot of harm. And there's so much shame around it. And that's why people don't talk about it. Honestly, until I heard David's, it was a webinar that he did. I had never heard anyone as an adult talk about a struggle with reading, right? It was something that, if it was ever spoken about, it's talked about as kids, right? Which adds on to the shame too, when there's so many. I had no idea how widespread this problem
Well, for
is.
sure. And as teachers, we don't see that. You might see it in high school, but you certainly don't see it. You don't see the fallout and the aftermath of the adults that are hanging out there. I mean, there's millions and millions of adult, Americans that
Yes.
are sub-literate.
Yes.
And the impact that has on them emotionally, as you well know, it's, and economically for them.
Yes.
No,
Yeah.
I
Like
mean,
I'm
yeah.
very fortunate that my coping skills were as high as they were, and I've been able to be as successful as I have been, which I even then feel is a risk by me sharing my story of, will that be taken away? And I think the other piece about it is too, like when I ask people, so as I've started telling, right, like I've had to start telling people because I'm in the documentary. So my story
Right.
is going to go very, very public.
Yes.
Even down to already the few screenings that there have been, there's already been a handful of people in my network that are like, oh, I saw the documentary and you're in it. And I had no idea. But everyone that I have told since then, which is becoming a very long list of people, and I mean, people that I've worked immensely close with that have read my work, proofed my work, because I always needed a second set of eyes on everything because I never trusted myself.
Right.
I can't explain how horrible it is to not be able to trust yourself.
Sure.
And the amount of difference that it makes in your life when you're like, I can trust myself. I can trust that the work that I've done is good. But I would have people that would proof my work. And again, they had no idea the gymnastics that I had done, or like the work I had done to put it together. But I haven't had a single person that's like, oh, I knew. Every single person has been like, no way. What are you no, there's no way. Like, you're so smart, you're so this, that, like, if it's like there's this association with intelligence and literacy that's
Very
just
much
not
so.
true,
Especially
right?
spelling.
Especially spelling.
Spelling is like the tell-all, when you see people who can't spell, you're like, oh, I mean, I've heard comments, and I'll remind my husband, it's like,
yeah. Oh,
dyslexic. you know?
It's absolutely like if you're spelling, and like for me, the way that I look at it now, which has taken me a couple of years to get to this, is when before I definitely looked at it like there was something inherently wrong with me and I had to keep it secret. Again, that was a decision I made very young and I didn't feel like people should know. But as I've gotten older, to me, because even the way that when you do the print to speech or the speech to print methodology, even kids with dyslexia or people who have the like they're all fine too, right? Like, I mean, the ones I can say all because I don't know all kids, but the people that I have referred, none of them have come back and had these issues ongoing for years and years and years. They've all made significant gains, at least the ones in my network that I know of, which is getting to be a lot of people. And so to me, it's not that, it's the basic difference of you, if you know how to spell well, you had someone, or maybe you were an anomaly and you learned it on your own, but most likely most people don't even remember how they learned how to read. If they know how to phonetically read, they don't even remember how they learned. And I've had people that are like, oh no, like, you know, this didn't happen to this. And then they call their parents, and our parents like, yeah, we did this with you all the time. Like the way that I look at it now is that you had someone who taught you how to do that at a very young age, and you just take it for granted. They have no idea what it's like to be on the other side of that. And we have a school and an academic system that literacy is so foundational that those kids that were at that first table in kindergarten, they got praised and support and put at the top of their class from the time we were 5 years old. And I got put at the bottom of the class and got ridiculed, shamed, told terrible things from the time I was 5 years old, over and over and over again. Like that's that's a terrible, terrible system. But what it does is it creates people that have never, you know, they don't even see the gift or the gift that they've been given through being literate at such young age, and that they had the opportunity to do so many things. If I had been given this at 7, I've had an immense amount of grief. If I had this at 7 years old, who knows what I would have become? Who knows what I would have done? Like, look at what I've accomplished in spite of this. Right? Like, you know, like, I mean, if I didn't have to spend 25 minutes to send an email, what might I have done? We'll never know.
Yeah.
Well, but yeah.
You're an amazing woman, and amazing, and your story has to be told, and we appreciate the fact that you were brave enough and vulnerable enough to do it. And I think every time you tell someone, it's a very cathartic process that you go through. And, you know, hopefully it'll be getting easier and easier for you. You know, you're in a community here that knows full well what you're going through. On the receiving end, we're not really, you know, many of us are not dyslexic, but we certainly work with folks that are, and we appreciate the struggles that you've gone through, and we're here to help. So we're going to open it up for any questions, and we have a thank you so much for sharing from Lindsay.
Oh, thank you, Lindsay. Yeah, it has become, like I said, the first time I told Nick, I cried the entire time. Sure. So it's getting much and much less sensitive. So
you're just getting stronger and stronger. I should have worn my shirt. We can do it. I had my Rosie the Riveter shirt on earlier today. I'm very emotional right now because I just everything that you've been through, and you know, the folks that we work with, it's really hard. And I think that's why we do what we do. You know, we can't turn our backs on it. It's just too important. It's too important for our kids and for our country, really. You know,
it is.
It truly is. So
I appreciate you sharing your platform and all of your listeners, and you know, I really, really appreciate it. So
back at you, my friend. All right, if we have no questions, we're going to call it a night.
Okay.
And I have to mention that Anne was evacuated yesterday from her home, but made it back. She was with us tonight. We appreciate that for sure. All right. Good night, everyone, for being here. Good night.
Thanks, Donna.
Thank you.
Thank
Anne.
you so much. Thank you.
Bye.